Hello and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence with me, Niall Murphy. And you can hear dogs barking in the background. I've been trying to do a few takes today to get this right, but I can't stop the noise from picking up. I can only hope that this lav mic here is not that sensitive and that what you're hearing is not as loud as what I'm hearing to your ears. So we'll just see how it goes, eh? Right? I can hear some bloody kid crying over there. I can hear a dog over there. Pain in the arse. Anyway, on with it. So, what I want to talk about today is, it appears everyone all of a sudden is talking about the Fabian Society. Yes. I noticed that Alex Phillips started talking about the Fabian Society on Talk TV. In fact, I'm just going to go over to that clip and you can see for yourself. See you at the other end.
I started doing some digging. I'm a keen user of X, and every now and then I see something trending or a buzzword floating around, and I think I'm going to have to look into that, won't I? And people have been making a mention of the Fabian Society. Now, I've heard of the Fabian Society lots before. I was well aware that it existed. I'm sure in my career as a journalist, I might have interviewed people representing the Fabian Society. I knew it was a left-wing think tank that publishes research papers, and the various Labour Party politicians are connected to it. And I thought, all right, that's that then. Nothing to see here. Nothing weird about that. Lots of right-wing think tanks, aren't there? The IEA, Policy Exchange, various affiliated MPs, even prime ministers. And so I just thought that, anything that sort of digs around in the weeds there and tries to make it sound like something more than it is just pure conspiracy theory. But then, I was sitting on the train and thought, I'm going to have a look at this. And so I went on their website and I started looking at some of the examples of their research papers, things like why we should have no borders whatsoever, etc. I then looked at their bragging rights over who their members, and we're not just talking about members sort of loosely associated. We're talking sort of sit on the executive committee, all work together. We're talking sort of cabal level involvement. And they proudly boast that all the Labour Prime Ministers have been Fabian, and that half of Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet are not just sort of associated, but eyeball deep in the Fabian Society. And I was like, okay, right, so all of our Labour politicians, seemingly, who have any positions of power, come from this. Then I found out it wasn't just politicians. Oh no, heads of quangos, the Governor of the Bank of England, loads of people are connected to this. And they have pretty radical ideas about the world. And then I thought, well, okay, what do we know? And you look at their original emblem, which is a wolf wearing a wolf in sheep's clothing. And they basically say, we want radical global socialism, but we're not going to do it via revolution. No. We're going to be the wolf in sheep's clothing. Quite literally, they changed that emblem to a turtle. Again, this idea that, slowly, won't suspect us of anything, but before you know it, guess what? Your Western values, your culture, your customs, your heritage, your capitalism, your progress, your profitability, your prosperity, all of it is going to be destroyed, even the concept of a nation state, because that is their radical end goal. And you know what? When you dig down, it's happening. It has happened. It is taking place today.
Now, she then went over to a couple of guests, right? And one of the guests was the barrister Stephen Barrett. I didn't want to play the whole thing because the whole thing's quite long. So I just got a few interesting bits. And I'm just going to get a little bit of a clip from what Stephen Barrett had to say, and then I shall come back.
And which genius thought that having a secret society in Great Britain would in any way end up doing any form of good? The other thing I'd like to flag, because I think it gets missed, is that Orwell, who was a proper socialist, a proper lefty, he didn't like these people. And there's a reason why 1984 is 1984, because the Fabians are founded in 1884. And with their slow movement, he thought they'd get their way by 1984. Now, we've held them off. We've held them at bay. We've got to 2025. But by the skin of our teeth, we appear to be in the middle of something that is just not decent, moral, or good, or professional, or it seems to be some sort of cultish ideology. And it's a cult. Alex, I'd really like to highlight this. They're not the best lawyers. So it's really a leg up for the lawyers who are frankly a bit dim. I no longer feel the need to pull my punches on this, Alex. Years ago, I would never have said that. I would never have just been honest. But it's about time we had some honesty. If we don't have some brutal honesty, we're not going to get out of this. And it's generally a cult that offers the not very able and easy access to public life. And that I think is why the country is falling apart. Because when you have non-merit based recruitment, your country actually ends up being pretty rubbish. I mean, all they care about is furthering the aims of the Fabian Society and furthering their little cultish aims. Well, that's great, but we actually care about things like the national debt, the economy, justice, law and order, and all of these things are being removed by Fabians. It would not surprise me at all to discover that certain chief constables are Fabians. It would not surprise me at all to discover Fabians really in quite a lot of places, always in receipt of public money, always over promoted beyond their ability, and all of them marching to the music of the cult.
Now, it's quite interesting what he said, that Stephen Barrett said that the Fabian Society started in 1984. They were basically the inspiration for George Orwell when he wrote 1984, because he said because of the slow, glacial, gradualist, incremental, long-term, nibble at it a little bit over time nature of the Fabian Society, that they would finally reach their end game and bring in that totalitarian dictatorship in time for 1984. Now, George Orwell, like I said, was a lefty. He was a socialist. It's funny how these days he's become a champion of a lot of the people on the right, because he wasn't on the right himself. He wasn't actually in favour of capitalism. He was actually what you would call a kind of social democrat, I suppose. He was into kind of socialism, but he wasn't really much into communism. And but the dictatorship that he depicted, the regime that he depicted, the inner party, if you like, in 1984 was socialist, Ing Sok, which is basically Newspeak short language for English socialism. Kind of reminds you of the Office of Communication, Ofcom. So it turns out that they were using 1984 as an instruction manual after all. Who'd have thunk it, eh? Right, yeah. So, yes, the reason why I want to bring this up is because I have been having this kind of debate over WhatsApp with a mate of mine that I've known for a very long time, who is convinced that the far right are a bigger problem than I am convinced that they are now. He's also convinced that the Labour Party in its present guise is not socialist and not even left-wing. He thinks of them as right-wing. And, I mean, I don't know where he's getting his information from, but what I will say is that because of the very, siloed nature of how we consume our information these days, we're all living in different parallel universes. It's not a judgment on him. I don't think he's coming from a place of ignorance or stupidity. I think what it is that because of the siloed nature of what we're seeing, there's not many people who are trying to zoom out and look at the big picture. There's not many people who are trying to get as neutral as possible an understanding of what's going on. So I'm just basically making an argument to why I'm presenting that the present regime that exists in the UK as actually being far left, and that the far right is not really the problem. It's like if you've read 1984, I think of it as an Emmanuel Goldstein type phantom that's kind of made real by spin. It was worse at one point, and I remember them, what I would call the real far right. And the thing about it that makes it different now is, a good example is this bloke, a Sikh man called Harman Kapoor Singh. My friend sent me a picture of him and then said, look down at all the comments underneath, look at all these racists, look at all these far right people. Now, that would have convinced me if I didn't know who Harman Kapoor Singh was, because I've seen him in a lot of videos. He goes to the Tommy Robinson rallies. In fact, he'll probably be there on September the 13th, the United Kingdom one. He was at the last one. He was protesting alongside the England flag wavers at a number of protests, including in Canary Wharf outside the Britannia Hotel. And he is very much allied with and on the side of the English. He said that he came to England, gave him a better life, and he had spent time in Afghanistan, and he doesn't like the idea of the migrant hotels because he considers them, in his words, to be the barbarians that he came to England to get away from and that they're following him, basically. That was his words and that's what he said. Every time I've seen him, and every time he turns up in a video to do with the protests and the citizen journalists interviewing, it's like he's a star. It's like they consider him to be like his rival, or his presence to be like a special occasion. And they often thank him for coming. And that is at odds with those comments, because the people who make those comments, I've never seen in any of the videos presented by the citizen journalists. And to be honest, I don't think the citizen journalists would hide or obfuscate the real far right if they saw them. They would point them out and they would tell everyone and they would call them out. And then a lot of the people who are citizen journalists or intellectuals on the right would also call them out. I'm sure of it at this point, right? Now, the thing in the case of that is that who are these commenters? Because, you know, when you actually think about what can happen to you if you say something inflammatory on social media these days in the UK, Lucy Connolly was a good example, because after the, what's his name? After the Southport massacre thing happened, Lucy Connolly got very angry, put a very angry and inflammatory tweet onto X, thought better about it, deleted it 4 hours later, and then as a result was sentenced to 31 months in prison after being coerced into pleading guilty because they told her she'd be out by Christmas and she didn't want to meet her family. I saw the interview that she gave, 2 interviews. One was with Alison Pearson of The Telegraph and the other one was with Dan Wootton. That's what she said. She was coerced and railroaded into pleading guilty because she was worried that if she said not guilty, that she should be remanded for so long in a long queue. And by the time she went to court with her not guilty plea in front of a jury, it would be longer than her sentence. So that's why she pleaded guilty. And a lot of people did that with these show trials, these kangaroo courts that all happened last year. And so that's the trouble. And then again, you know, Graham Linehan, for those of you who have been paying attention, the writer and creator of Father Ted, amongst a lot of other comedies as well in the 90s and the early 2000s, right? He basically became, you know, joined what you call it, the TERFs, the trans exclusionary feminists, if you like, because he realised that the trans rights activists, and again, you know, I want to specify trans rights activists, not trans people necessarily, had become a very intimidating bunch of people, and they had scared people into believing and going along with a certain ideology. And then when he spoke about it, he lost a lot of friends, he lost a lot of gigs. His Father Ted the musical that he was trying to arrange to start up was cancelled as a result of it. He lost a lot of everything. It put him under so much stress. I think he ended up getting divorced as a result of this. It kind of ruined his life. And then he moved to America, and recently he's been in Arizona, and he's been actually getting involved with writing some new comedy. But then he had to come back to England to go on trial for something. So he arrives at Heathrow, and the police, 5 armed police with machine guns, decide to arrest him. He's detained for, is it upwards of 16 hours or something like that? He basically has an anxiety attack which affects his health, and he's admitted to hospital and apparently had narrowly escaped getting a stroke or something as a result of the way they treated him when he was there. He's not a British citizen. He didn't tweet in Britain, and he used a foreign, service. But he comes to Britain, he gets arrested. Now the thing is, right, that if that's the case and that's how it is for you, that you can say those things, but if you're on the other side, if you're like hope not hate, you can make up lies about, you know, acid attacks on Muslims or whatever like that, and get away with it, and the government will back you to say, oh, they got their information wrong, there's nothing we can do about it, right? If there clearly is proven to be a 2-tier system, then logically it wouldn't really be safe for all these racists to come out of the blue and to leave all those comments underneath Harman Kapoor Singh, unless Harman Kapoor Singh is someone who's joined the English Patriots and refuses to be on the DEI plantation and be like an obedient woke member of the client classes, right? Which is basically the way it works. Because if you are black or brown, or you know, or say for instance you're a feminist like J.K. Rowling is, but you just don't side with the trans people. If you're black or if you're brown, but you don't side with the DEI agenda, they're quite happy. They consider you fair game, so they'll allow racist comments against you. And as a result of that, these people will leave racist comments against Harman Kapoor Singh with impunity. And it makes me wonder, like, because every time Harman Kapoor Singh goes to the demos and he's on the side of the England flag wavers, they treat him like a star. They love him, you know, and he's never experienced any racial abuse. Again, with the citizen journalists, like the black man, Brother Wendell, who works for Tommy Robinson, or like, let me see, there's Wesley Winter, who looks Chinese. There's, what's his name, Will Coleshill from Resistance GB, who is sort of brown. I don't know if he's half English mixed with something else, like black or Asian, I don't know. But again, they're clearly people of colour. And then there's the young white girl, Emma Dunwell, who, her I don't know if it's her boyfriend or cameraman, right-hand man, who's always with her but is always off camera, is Jamaican. They would, I'm sure, film these people who say these things to them and call them out if they did. And I've been watching a lot of their videos, and I've never ever witnessed any of these people being on the receiving end of racism whenever they've been about talking to the England flag wavers. The only place I see this racism, that having done the research that I've done, is lurking in the shadows, commenters on anonymous people commenting on X or something like that. And so, who are these people? Are they bots? Are they intelligence services? Are they like plants? Are they fake accounts? Or are they just cowards lurking in the shadows who don't show their faces anywhere in real life and don't make their presence known in real life? Because there does seem to be a disparity for me between what goes on in the real world from what I see and what goes on comments on social media. And that is a bit of a problem. I'm getting visited by a cat at the moment. A cat recently has decided to adopt me. So I'm going to hope that he comes up here and lets me stroke him. And hopefully I will be able to keep my train of thought just going. So I'm stroking the cat now. I'm like an evil cat stroking villain, like, you know, like a Blofeld. Anyway, where was I? Yes. So the conclusion that I come to is that if someone is, like Harman Kapoor Singh, considered to be fair game, because although he's a Sikh and although he's of Indian origin and Punjabi origin, but probably lived in Afghanistan, if he is not siding with the woke, the DEI, the lefties, then the powers that be would consider him to be fair game, to be on the receiving end of those racist comments. Which then makes me wonder, who are the people leaving those racist comments? Are they even real? Because they might not be. They might actually be the 77th Brigade, they might be bloody MI6, they might be MI5, they might be just some government department, they might be this that Keir Starmer or whoever has set up recently. Could be something like that, you just don't know. They might be real but cowardly and don't show their faces. They might be the secret masked people that you meet. Or alternatively, there might be members of some of the, how can I say, more ethno-nationalist groups, like maybe like Homeland Party, or maybe like Britain First, but they don't speak publicly about this when they're on camera. These accounts are probably anonymous, or as anonymous as you can get. And they're probably overlooked because they're aimed at not just anyone. They probably wouldn't be able to get away with sending those messages to someone like Trevor Phillips, for instance. They probably wouldn't be able to get away with sending them to Narendra Kaur, because she's a good plantation woman. She is. She's the ultimate woke race baiter, and so as a result, and they don't send them to Diane Abbott or anyone like that. They probably would be arrested if they did send them to that. But it's okay, I suppose, the way it looks, to send him to someone like Harman Kapoor Singh, because he's a Sikh, pro-English patriot type. Sorry, the cat, he's there. He's meowing at me. That's all right. Anyway, here I am trying to multitask, stroke the cat while talking to you on the camera. Oh well, yeah. You can hear him there in the background there. Right, so where was I leading to as a result? Back to the Fabians, yes. So, the reason why I believe that my mate doesn't think of Labour as being socialist and doesn't think of them as being lefties is because of the shape-shifting nature of the left-wing parties. As you go from one type of, like, you know, power to the people, socialism, to a more kind of, you know, against the people, communism, They just change their tack. Now, for instance, if you went back to the time of Marx, the way it was then is that they wanted to adopt the working classes to be the proletariat, to be the people who would help them bring in their agenda. But the working classes of England are not interested in turning into communists, and so as a result, they had to look somewhere else. So the long march through the institutions in the 1960s, etc., led to a place where they had to find new people. Now, you end up having to get the middle classes, the champagne socialists, to come along. The very, what you call it, guilty about their own social status people who have to adopt telescopic philanthropism. So as the working classes now are all in the UK considered to be a bunch of filthy gammons, right, who just won't conform to the agenda that we demand that they must conform to, therefore they're fascists, right? They have to look elsewhere. So in the time of multiculturalism, they have to now manifest their paternalistic racism towards the people that they consider to be culturally inferior to them, so they can parent them by pretending that, with their virtue signalling. Oh, look how anti-racist I am, as they demonstrate their virtue to all those other people at those Islington dinner parties. That's the sort of thing they do. So the new proletariat is the oppressed women, the oppressed black people, the oppressed gay people, say for instance, the trans people, anyone who they can. And they hate those gammon working class people, those horrible istophobes who don't buy into that whole way of thinking. So being, that they can't now no longer apply their social justice to the lefties, they're not going to look after the workers. They're not going to look after any of these people. Now, you can see that, like in the case of the unions, who, again, have been a lot of the people who have been funding the Labour Party, the unions and Starmer don't get on. They don't like each other. From the position of looking at one lot of people, the unions as more like traditional lefties, they do look like traditional lefties. But the post-Blairite types, with their more slick-looking corporate spin-doctoring, media-friendly world, that they don't. They appear to be more conservative or more right-wing to the untrained eye. That's what I think. And in the case of some, in the post-Blair era, they've just been looking somewhere else to get their new proletariat, because the working classes won't conform to that now. So, but ultimately, being Fabians, they want to destroy everyone. They want to bring in their new regime, but ultimately what they'll do is they'll just end up collapsing the whole country. But maybe that's part of their plan, to collapse the whole country, because then they can postpone elections, which hopefully won't come to that. Keir Starmer's got almost 4 years to be able to force it to kick off, to force emergency powers in. That Blair actually did bring in some legislation to say that if the whole of the UK just kicked off and got so bad, they would be able to postpone elections, in which case you would never get rid of him, right? So that's the problem that we have to deal with at the moment, and they've done a very good job at getting any of the right-wing oppositional parties and convincing people that they're actually closer to Hitler, right? And I don't know, I just think that it's, I don't believe any of it myself. I mean, it's the thing, I'm utterly sceptical of it. I don't think that Farage basically or Reform are the best people for the job, but I do think that they are the least worst, considering who's likely to become Prime Minister next. Could you imagine Starmer for another 5 years? Could you imagine him being Prime Minister until 2034? Could you imagine him being Prime Minister till 2039 if he lives to be in his mid-70s? Could you imagine that? That's the problem, you see. So, yeah, I have looked very much into this, and yet the Fabians, this is what they do. They are shapeshifters. They want to convince you they don't exist. They want to convince you they're not the sort of people that they actually are. And the thing is that with politics is that as you go from one time to another, I don't think of in the world in the same paradigm inside my head that I would have done if it was the 1990s anymore. No, I think I had to literally flip and invert the way I see the world since then. Because I knew people who were more of the left but were anti-fascist. And the problem we have at the moment is that I no longer believe that fascism is on the right and that communism is on the left. You see, the way I look at it is that you have libertarianism or you have authoritarianism. And if you're looking at it from one dimension, you're not looking at it from the other side. And if you were to add a third dimension, individualism and collectivism to it, if you are either on the political left or on the political right, but you are a libertarian and you are pro-individualist, then I don't see you as being able to go into any level of extreme at all. It could be, the only difference being that you're more into social welfare and you're less into entrepreneurialism if you're on the left. You're more conservative, more entrepreneurial, and more of a driven and bootstrapping person if you're on the right. But you still would see the world within the parameters of freedom and personal individualism and sovereignty and autonomy. But when it comes to authoritarianism, well, I see communism and fascism, or what I call commie-fascism, as the same thing. The end game is the same thing. The only difference is one has more of a thing about ideology towards the oppressed against the oppressor class, and the other side has more of a ideology towards the pure and the clean against the impure and the unclean. But the end game, the totalitarian state, ultimately there's very little difference between the two. And that's where I think people get really confused when it comes to politics. And that's why I think that, you know, it's always important to reevaluate where you're at. Is the paradigm, the lens that you perceive reality through, based in another time? If you're my age, if you're in your 50s, there's a very high chance. Excuse the motorbike in the background. I wish you'd shut up. Right, where was I? Oh yeah. If you are in your 50s like I am, or in your 60s, it's even worse when you have a little bit less elasticity in your brain than you would have if you were a younger person. You have more wisdom, so you're not likely to fall for a lot of stuff that you would when you were young as well. It becomes harder for you to give your brain the operating system upgrades that it needs to be able to be with the paradigm that we're in at the moment. That's the thing that I consider to be the real problem that we're facing right now. And so, a lot of people don't want to lose face. They don't want people to be thinking, oh God, he's turned into a fascist or a racist or whatever. You see, I'm so sick of hearing about all this stuff now that I just don't give a fuck. I mean, my attitude is that if someone was to call me, that now, here I am in the Philippines, surrounded by coconut trees. I don't see many expats out here. I'm not really in a place with a lot of foreigners. And so as a result, I'm the only whitey around here. I'd be bloody stupid, wouldn't I? I mean, I'd be bloody stupid to be here if I was a racist. I'm sure that some strange lefties out there will come up with some sort of argument to explain why I am that. If therefore I must be motivated by hate, therefore I must be here to colonise the place. Yeah, should try that with the authorities here, eh? I mean, fuck's sake, you'd have to be stupid to even believe that, right? So, I mean, I just laugh if anyone accuses me of that out here, right? That's the thing. I wouldn't have to feel the need to validate myself to say, no, I'm not a racist or anything, but I just laugh. I mean, fuck, you'd have to be stupid. Right, that aside, there's the other thing that they have to tell me that I'm a sexist as well. That's another thing they have to tell me at all. Right, so, what we do, I spend most of my time in female companies these days. There's the wife, there's their daughter, and then, of course, occasional visits from her sisters as well, right? So that's another thing about being out here. Do I hate them all? Do I want to dominate them like a man while colonising them for being that different? I mean, you'd have to be really stupid to think that, because then everything about my life would have to be based on hate and on power. But the authoritarians, and of course, a lot of the lefty authoritarians, they see everything through the lens of power. Everything has to be about having power over other people. Are you the oppressor? Are you the oppressed? Do you want to dominate? Do you want to oppress? Or do you want to show your victim colours and look how oppressed I am? Or are you just the sort of person who doesn't desire power at all and just wants to just live a normal life within the parameters of normality that a non-normie like myself wants to live in? But you know what I mean, right? That's what I mean. And it's just exhausting having to go through all this bollocks. So, yeah, this is the thing. I would basically say to everyone, go do your research into the Fabians. I'm going to actually go dig deep into this myself. I only know on a surface level what they're all about. But if it's true, and bear in mind that as far as I know, it has been confirmed to me that every single member, every single leader of the Labour Party who has ever existed has been a Fabian so far. So what does that mean? It means that they were set up by the unions, by the workers, right? Back in the late 19th, early 20th century, when certain Marxists who rose to the top in the Labour Party thought, oh, well, we can get the proletariat to join the revolution. But this was before the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union at the time, and it was even before the Soviet Union, right? So this is the thing. If that's what they started with, yeah, rights for workers, up the workers and all of that bollocks, right? But it turns out that the Fabians were actually thinking, well, we're not going to be able to bring that revolution to England, so what we'll have to do is we'll have to just do a slow, how slow do the Chinese think when they're thinking long term about things? We'll just nudge a little over time, and that's what they're up to, because it would have been rejected in England, right? So there you go. It makes a lot of sense now. And to make themselves appear like they're not lefties while wearing suits and having a very much corporate, clean-cut, slick appearance and all of that, well, that makes sense as well. And, the very kind of sneaky, Machiavellian, shape-shifting, gaslighting stuff, that everything about them is lies and deception. There's nothing about them that is real. You cannot take anything they say at their words, absolutely nothing whatsoever. And what we really ought to hope for is that as we go into the future, as the UK goes into the future, that what will happen next probably is a strong man will come along, like Donald Trump or whatever, will basically lead the country. And then we'll hope that this strong man is benevolent and leads the country back into a sense of freedom that it had before. What we've got to do is hope that this strong man who does end up leading Britain away from the tyranny that is facing itself now from the left doesn't turn out to be a future Hitler. Because that's one of the pitfalls that we could fall into if we're not careful. And that's something to watch. Now, people on the left think that everyone who don't think like them is Hitler. People on the right are in the danger of becoming complacent to think, well, you've got to watch the strong man who comes along and saves you, that he doesn't turn out to be a Hitler or Napoleon. We have to be flexible in our thinking, we have to be cautious and all of that. It's really important. But most important, the left and the right at the moment seem to be uniting against Starmer for many different reasons. Could we get the Venn diagram of commonality that we have, stop bickering over the shit that we don't need to bicker over, and unite? As Aragorn says, there may come a time when we'll have to start bickering again or whatever about all our differences, where our bonds are cut and we go our separate ways. But it is not this day. And that's basically what it's got to be about. All the people who can unite should unite. The common premise between us all has got to be common decency. And the thing that we have to try to do is to jettison as much ideological possession, inflexible thinking, and try to come to some common consensus as possible. Because that's all we got, really. That's all we got to go on. And as we go into this future, no matter how dystopian it goes, the one thing people in the UK really do need to do is not let it kick off. Do it all peacefully. That's the only way to do it. Don't kick off. It's not big and it's not clever. And yes, be careful what you tweet, be careful what you post, be careful what you say. Not because I don't respect free speech, but because they will use it against you. They will use it as a means of saying, look, we told you so. Look at all these far-right thugs. Look at all these savages. Right, we're bringing in these emergency powers. No more elections for you peasants. We're taking over control of everything. And then you have the new West North Korea. Don't let that happen. Right, shall we leave it at that then? Till whenever. See you later, alligator. See you soon. Baboon.